anything that kind of continues to nag on you, like you realize you tried to shake it off, but you just can't let it go, or you find yourself kind of like needing to frequently process it with people outside of work or even inside of work. So you take your lunch break and you're talking to your work friend about this thing that happened. I think anything that stays with you longer than, something typically would is probably a good sign that you need to go ahead and talk about it.
Yeah, I like that you definitely know exactly the signs, because it's like if you're talking about it or venting with your friends outside of work, but also venting with your friends inside of work about something, which is kind of a whole nother topic. But I mean, how healthy is it to be talking about your intimidating conversations with your coworkers?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways, some of that is necessary, right? Because you're kind of getting your thoughts together and bouncing it off another person, maybe in some ways to kind of get feedback about whether other people are seeing this as well.
Right.
But I think you don't want to do too much of it because, one, it just kind of amps you up in a lot of ways. And so you kind of get all of this fire underneath you. And then maybe the conversation is a little more explosive than initially it could have been if you'd have
Yeah.
just, right? If you had just gone to that person initially. So I think you want to kind of be careful about doing too much of processing with other people before you go directly to that person.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is really important, because it's processing. It's not avoiding the conversation by instead talking the ears off of other people around you about it. So
Mhm.
like at some point,
Exactly.
it's like, the person who's always breaking up with the same boyfriends. Like at some point you can't just talk about it with me. We have to just like have you have that intimidating conversation, right? It's kind of like that with work, where the processing can probably only, people can only process for so long, and then you just have to do it. And that's probably healthy for you too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, if you're spending that much energy processing it with somebody else, just think of how much energy you're using processing it internally for yourself, right? It's even more energy. So you're using up a lot of energy with this situation that could be kind of dispelled if you would just go ahead and have that conversation.
100%. So how can we? Okay, you've processed it. You've decided you're going to have the conversation. How can we prepare for and successfully get through difficult conversations at work?
Yeah, so I think one of the first things that you want to do is to go ahead and make yourself a list of the points that you want to actually discuss with this person. Because sometimes I think that can help you to streamline your thoughts so that you can try to stay on task as much as possible and to avoid getting overly emotional if at all possible. So making yourself a list, I think, is really helpful. I think you also want to try to avoid having an audience for this conversation if possible. I know we're going to be talking about bullying also, but in the case of like just, a coworker misunderstanding or something like that, I think if you can avoid having an audience, it is much more likely that the conversation goes well than if you have like a bunch of people there kind of feeling things in the backfire in the
Totally.
background.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that you want to do is to make sure that you remind yourself that you can only take responsibility for sharing your thoughts and feelings. You do not have any control over how this person hears it, what they do with the information afterwards, and anything after you share. So I think a lot of times we go into conversations thinking that we can kind of dictate the outcome. And as much as you would hope that, you absolutely have no control over it. So, I think sometimes we avoid these conversations because we don't want to hurt feelings or we, are afraid of what the outcome will be. But it is important to just go ahead and share your thoughts and feelings without being tied to what the outcome is going to be.
Much easier said than done, I'm sure.
Of course, of course.
So what about communication methods? Because, in the workplace, we have in person, we have email, we have probably some sort of instant messenger. I mean, you have all these ways to communicate that are outside of face to face. Is face to face the best way to communicate?
I think for most situation it is going to be. Now you can use email or instant messenger or something to arrange a time to chat. But I think, still there is so much missed in written communication
Yeah.
that an in-person conversation would be the best thing if possible.
And then is there any truth to, the timing? This should be within, let's say there was an incident, like it should be within 48 hours of the incident. It should be within a week. Like, is there any truth that sooner is better than later?
Well, I think it is true that sooner is better than later in terms of people being able to like remember exactly what happened, right? Like if it's
Right.
3 months ago and you're talking about, an incident from lunch, most people are likely not going to understand that. So I think the sooner can be better in terms of remembering, and also that you are not living with it for that long. You know, if it's something that you're stewing over for weeks at a time, that is not good either.
Right. And then I guess the last question is let's say this is like one of those difficult conversations where it's pretty serious. Like, you know, people could lose jobs, or, you know, clients could be let go of, or whatever it is like that. Is it a good idea to bring quote unquote evidence? Like, let's say you're having this difficult conversation with your boss about the fact that I don't know, they never communicated about XYZ part of a project, and I mean, you want to show like email proof or something like that. Like, is that a good idea, or does that just really irritate people?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, and even if they get irritated, you have to cover yourself, right? So I think anytime you're talking about like a high level kind of a situation where people could be let go or there could be like some serious consequences, you want to have as much proof as possible related to whatever this conversation is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea.